All right, how is everyone doing? I'm Rich CELENZA, and thanks for checking out the Rich CELENZA Show. WTF are you talking about? So what I want to get into today is a segment I want to call Do Not Let Them Own You. And stick with me on this one because I'm going to kind of flip-flop at different times, and I'm just known as being kind of a flip-flopper myself, is saying certain things, changing my mind, even questioning myself as I'm saying certain things. But in this case, just kind of bear with me. But so I once went to see this documentary in New York in Greenwich Village. I used to go to New York all the time with my cousin and some friends and colleagues, and we would always go to the IFC theater. I don't know if you're familiar with that theater. It's an independent kind of theater. They show a lot of unique different types of films, independent films, and I was an independent filmmaker, so I used to love going to them. And we once went and saw a documentary on Bill Cunningham. I think it's actually called New York, and it was amazing. And what was amazing about this, it kind of changed the way I look at life in this documentary. Well, if you don't know anything about Bill Cunningham, he was a famous photographer throughout New York for, I don't even know how many years. It could have been 60, 70 years. It's unbelievable. He would go around on a bicycle, and he was doing this from a very young age. I think when he got out of the military, I'm trying to remember this, it was like 10 years ago. And he started taking photos of all different types of people at fashion shows, of people in New York and all these different things. He was just taking all these amazing photos. Eventually things started to catch on, and I'm pretty sure they would post his photos in New York Post, maybe? Well, one of the more well-known New York newspapers, along with a lot of, if I'm not mistaken, a lot of magazines as well. And everybody wanted to hire him. Let's put it that way. What was amazing about him is the way he looked and presented himself, especially in the world of fashion. He literally was just like ragged out. He just drove around on a bicycle all over New York, all different types of weather conditions. He would be going through puddles, and it would be snowing, rain, anything. He didn't have an automobile. He didn't have really anything. I forgot how many bikes he went throughout his life. It's like astronomical. And what was interesting about him, there's a lot of things that really blew me away about him that I learned about fashion, and you don't even have to care about fashion about what I'm going to tell you is, though, because probably a lot of clothes that you may even worn in the past or you've known people to wear, he was one of the biggest influences. So what was happening was, that a lot of people know, is when he started taking a lot of photos, he was taking photos at at a lot of galas, events, runway shows and things in that nature, but he was also taking unbelievable pictures of people all over New York with different types of style and the way they would dress and all these things. And then they would be in the newspaper or magazines or wherever, and people started to see them. And what happened was, a lot of designers, not all, a lot of designers started to see how people were dressing in New York, or getting different ideas off these people that were actually creating fashion for themselves, let's say, or different looks. Sorry about that. But they were different looks. And before you know it, not all artists, I'm not saying all the designers in the world or any of that, that's ridiculous, but a lot of designers were taking what he was shooting of people in New York and then using that for their design or something similar. And then before you know it, a trend would catch, or there would be a huge show, and all of a sudden people would see these type of styles, or the way people were different patterns or different looks. And it was really off his photos, because he was discovering these people, and before you know it, that became a trend, and it could have became, a lot of them became worldwide trends. A lot of designers sold millions of dollars, all this different clothing based on the photos he took. What started to happen with him is his photos become more and more popular. Him as a photographer became more and more popular because he had an unbelievable eye for finding people that dressed really unique in New York. And there's a couple things in that movie that blow you away. He kind of pulls up, and even Anna Wintour, who's like, she's a god in the world of fashion, and he would go to these huge events in his bicycle, and the photo he would take would be the most important photo a lot of times at these shows. The way he would take them, or who he felt like was the top designer too. He had all these different types of influences. And he once pulled up, and they didn't want to let him in. And I don't know if it was Anna Wintour or somebody else. They looked at him and said, the security won't let him in. And then somebody huge walked in and said, no, he comes in. He is the most important person here. If you looked at it from a distance, he looked the poorest person there. And, what I'm going to get to with what he said is what really I'm trying to build this up for you to give you an idea of how he ended up in this position. And he ended up in that position because, according to him, he was never for sale, right? Nobody ever owned him, he said. He had, throughout his years, 50, 60, 70 years, whatever it was, he had a lot of companies wanting to hire him either, obviously to hire him on a salary, pay him hourly wage, whatever the case may be for his work, specifically, only him, and he refused to do that. And from an artist's point of view, I think that's absolutely amazing, but I think if we just look at that in our own life, that we're not always up for sale. Like, how I kind of want to word this, especially if you're maybe an artist, a lot of people, you want to create things, right? And you want to make money off those things, obviously. And you want to get paid for what you like to do or what you love to do. But a lot of times when you do these things, that's when you become restricted. With him, like he always said, he can shoot photos of whatever he wanted, whenever he wanted, and sell them to whoever he chose to, or let them use it for free. He wasn't under a contract with anyone. He was not for sale, which is amazing in itself. If he, according to him, I think to a certain degree, if he did tie in with one newspaper, one magazine, or one company, whatever that may be, they would, no matter what, be always overseeing him. They may have let him do whatever he wants to do, but usually, as you know, when you work for someone or you do certain things where you are getting paid, that person has input on what you're doing. Sometimes it's good, sometimes it's bad. But regardless, in his case, his freedom was his gift and his pay. Now, I'm not saying riding around on a bicycle would be my type of angle, and I get it. I think they talk about how much money he's missed out on, but he always lived the life that he wanted to live, which is amazing because it doesn't seem like it was about money. It was about, again, the experience he was going through. And what really becomes crazy is he becomes one of the most iconic figures in New York, and he's one of the brokest. I think he lived, I'm not saying he was homeless or anything like that, but he lived a very tough life as far as, I think, finances go at certain times. But again, as far as him being a figure, he was being treated and he lived the life that he always wanted to lead, which is amazing, especially for an artist. And I think a lot of times, I think I can speak for myself. When I was making movies, kind of like the long-term goal was to eventually maybe get to Hollywood and then you start doing Hollywood films and all these things, but I was so self-centered and stubborn where I only wanted to make the movies I wanted to make. And I only want to make my movies. And I used to, be like, oh no, when I got to that point, I'll be able to make someone else's movie. Just let me master my craft. But as time went on, I realized I have no interest whatsoever in making anyone else's movie right now. And I'm not saying that in the future that can happen, that I wouldn't mind doing something. And I read thousands of screenplays, literally. I've written, I don't even know at this point, 10? I don't even know. I've only optioned one. But the thing I look back at Cunningham and myself is, I did what I wanted to do, and I kind of stood behind that. And, I was able to sell my film for distribution, not making a ton of money, but I went with who I wanted to go with. But I still have all the rights to my film. And even when I did my books, I didn't go with a publisher. And people are like, well, I wanted to self-publish. I don't want anyone to be in control of my art. Is that good or bad? I don't know, because I know a lot of people out there that do get their books published, or a lot of filmmakers or producers that make a lot of money, which is wonderful. And God bless them. But I've even had talks and meetings with some guys that make mega bucks that never even made their own film, never wrote their own books, never even wrote their own screenplays. And they're always like, I wish I had the balls to do what you do. And I used to say, well, I wish I had the money you have. You're kind of going back and forth with that sometimes. But they're like, why I didn't do what you did? Because I was scared. I didn't think anybody would want to, watch my movie or would read my screenplay, or I don't know if I can handle the rejection, which I get all that. It's hard, I guess, to a certain degree, for other people to take that jump. It's easier to, say, be a producer of somebody else's film. You get a screenplay and you raise the funding with an executive producer, and then somebody directs it, and, you go from there, which is great stuff. Good. I mean, if it wasn't for producers, we wouldn't have, obviously films too. We all need it all has to come together. But as far as your own personal development or your own personal projects, and here's something I also want to get into regarding that. So I do, though, know a lot of artists who, their dream was to be, I'll just use a musician, because a lot of my family members are musicians. Some are in the film industry as well. But I grew up with my father owning a nightclub, and I used to see these bands, and my father actually plays drums too. And a lot of my family members play a lot of instruments, and they're still into it deep. But I realize with music, as far as my opinion goes, it exhausted me because it was so redundant to a certain degree. And I'll kind of give you my feedback on that real quick. So when my father had his club, these bands would come in. He would book 3 bands a night and a couple comedians. And they would come in and they would have to rehearse. Or sometimes they would even use his bar to rehearse. Before he opened, during hours, whatever the case may be. And a lot of those musicians had their own music. And they also would obviously do covers. And they would sit there over and over and over again trying to master that song. Sound like it when they sing it, instrumental, the whole thing. And it used to drive me crazy after a while. A lot of songs I was burnt out on. It was kind of funny because my father owning a club and me spending time there, and then me listening to the radio, I didn't even want to hear the songs because I kept hearing them in his bar. But what I found quite interesting is dealing with a lot of musicians that I was able to meet one-on-one is a lot of them wanted to obviously master their craft and, get a band and make money and tour all over the world, create music and all these things, which few and far between do. Way more fail than, obviously succeed. But regardless, what I noticed with the ones that actually succeeded is eventually they found themselves boxed into a corner with creativity. And again, being owned eventually by someone else. And you could probably, you see the stories of Prince, George Michael, or all these other artists where, the company comes in and they basically take over the rights to everything that they have, musically, personality, everything. And you're back to being owned. I mean, a lot of times you get the point where they're living an extravagant lifestyle. They wouldn't have had all those other things. But on the other end, what are they? Are they really a slave to now the one thing that they love doing? And back to musicians, I'll just use them for example, because a lot of musicians, I think, get boxed into a corner where if they create an album, say a band, and it becomes successful, usually what they want to do with the sophomore follow-up is something very similar. And I get familiarity is the key, because usually people now heard your sound or like who you are, and they want to hear something very similar, right? But a lot of times musicians, I believe a lot of times they can do something similar, but a lot of times they don't want to do exactly what they did before. But they need to make money. So now they have to do something similar. So they do something similar. Some succeed, some don't. But say they do succeed on their sophomore, which is a really huge thing because now they're touring, they're making a lot of money. Now they get in a position where they can't make a lot of times always the music they wanted to make, or at least new music, or experiment with different things. Now when you become to a highest level, you can kind of do whatever you want. But if, a label's controlling you, that's much different. And then, if you're kind of a catch-22 with your fans too, because you keep creating tunes, and I'm not saying all musicians, go through this either, but a lot of musicians get in a point where they have to keep doing things that are very similar to what they were doing before, because their fans expect that, their label expects that. So and I think we've all been through that. Like you've heard an album and you love them, and then they come out with another album, and that's one of your favorite bands, and then they're way off base. They don't sound anything like they did before. You're like, this doesn't sound like them, but you're almost not open-minded enough to say, well, let me try something new with them. Beastie Boys were kind of like that, and I like that. Like they would play all different types of things, and some people wanted to accept it and some didn't. Some, it just always wanted to be the same type of album. With their breakout album, very similar sounding to that. Well, they didn't want to get, put in a position where their back's against the wall. They can't create new music. And what I also think happens with this, back to musicians or just back to people, when you love something and you do it all the time and you want to eventually get paid for it, if you become successful in this, and I've seen this happen with a lot of people, what happens when you become successful and you're getting paid is, when the challenge isn't there anymore, or you've kind of mastered, or you've gotten to the place where you think you were going to get to. So if you're a musician and you're pushing out some great albums, great material, what's next for you? Because once you kind of start getting paid, or once you kind of master or keep doing the same thing over and over again that you always dreamt of doing, now what is your release? Because now it's a job. I realized, especially with artists. So what became something you loved to do, and you had the freedom of doing whatever you wanted, whenever you wanted to create these things, now there's also restrictions, there's time limits, there's a lot more money involved, there's all this different stress involved. And I think that's one of the things why a lot of guys become alcoholics or drug addicts, because now they don't have an escape. What they loved doing, and now they're getting paid for, that was their escape, right? Or even before they got paid, I should say. Their escape was diving into the music, or diving into whatever you want to create. And kind of that was the drive to become successful and loving that. And I'm not saying people that are alcoholics and drug addicts that, they are alcoholics and drug addicts that they don't do a lot of different things while creating art. That's ridiculous. But I do think there's a point in time where when the thing you love the most becomes your job, right? What are the other things that you like to do? And I think a lot of people get paralyzed, I call it. They don't know what to do because they're so wrapped up in that. And that's when I think they start kind of wanting to escape who they are to a certain degree, or experiment with different things, I should say. So back to being owned, and I get it, most of us have jobs, and a lot of us do all these different things. But if you have passion to do something, don't always look at it from a perspective of, you're not successful if you didn't get paid doing it, or you're not getting paid yet, or if you're a musician, you may have created an album, it may have failed, or you're not touring, hypothetically, or you're not this or that, or whatever in your mind you thought it was to be successful, because you really may be a lot more successful than you think you are, because you have your freedom. And to you, you may be like, that's really not that much. I'd rather have money. But I'm going to tell you something. I've had money and I've not had money. Having the freedom to kind of do what you want to do or create is priceless. And also having the time to do it. And also not having others kind of overseeing what you're doing and constantly being told what to do. Now, I'm all about collaboration. I don't want this to get twisted where you got to do everything independently and everybody is out to get you and all that nonsense. What I'm saying is, back to Bill Cunningham, is if you let somebody own you, then you usually, I can't say usually, but I think you're setting yourself up for a lot of stress. Again, that doesn't mean that I don't want you to get paid for what you're doing. And a lot of us need money, especially back to musician, artist, any of them. I don't care if you're a filmmaker. I don't care if you're a contractor, architect. We all have to make money. We have to pull a check in to survive. And at least in North America, you do. Unless somebody else is supporting you, that's a different story. But most of us have to make money. But if you really have the passion, or I guess you could say, if you want to really create, don't worry about the paycheck, is what I should say, more than anything. And also don't always, and I talk about familiarity, because if you want to make it in Hollywood or anywhere, you have to have some component or an idea that says, hey, I have to create something that people generally will like. If you go so far off and nobody ever likes your stuff, well, that's just the way it goes, right? We all have these things that we all kind of like to a certain degree. I don't care if it's Marvel, hypothetically, or if it's an action movie, or if I'm not into a chick flicks or whatever. We can rip on anything, but we kind of know the formula that works. If you go so far off and all of a sudden make a chick flick and you try to make it a horror chick flick, maybe it'll work, maybe it won't. But most people going to a chick flick want to see a chick flick. Most people that go to a horror film can go to a horror film. You could definitely add in different components that they both have, but for the most part, you kind of know what you're getting. But back to just really be honest with yourself when you're creating or trying to develop anything in your life, not just as an artist. I don't care if you're even going into your home, you're buying a home, or you're buying a car, or whatever you're doing. Don't put yourself again in a position where you're owned. So a lot of people I know live way outside their means, or they buy a home, they know that they're going to be under a lot of stress paying that mortgage, or they max out their, and same with a car. who owns the car really? You or the bank, right? Or whoever you're financing it, they own it till you pay it off. But again, you're kind of being owned. Don't live outside your means. Try to live your life where you are in total control of your life. And I think what's happening more and more I see is a lot of people are under so much stress. I'm seeing more and more sickness because I think in our minds a lot of times we think all these other things obviously will make us happy. Will they? Most likely they make us happy at the beginning. It's kind of like if you buy a new car or you buy a house or you buy something big for yourself. I don't care if it's a suit or a new watch. At the beginning, of course, it makes you happy. But again, what is that going to lead down the road? Does that happiness lead to stress? Same with a job. A lot of times we take on jobs where I think a lot of times people can't, I can't say they can't do the job, but a lot of them can't do it correctly, or they thought it was one way and they lie and manipulate the situation to get the job, and then they're way over their head. Don't do that to yourself, man. Again, you need to be in control. You're better off just having a job where you're making decent money, and you're not under the stress of maybe you're going to get fired, or you're way over your head, or you're putting in so much time, you kind of lose who you are. Again, you're being owned. And you don't have to be owned. I promise you, you need to kind of spend a lot of time and figure things out before you make commitments. And I believe that you spend a lot of time alone, for me, and think about your behavior and really think about the consequences. Don't look at the here and now a lot of times. Really do look in the future, right? And I know that sounds kind of corny. You've heard it a million times, but like if you're buying a car, I'll just use again for an example, you know it's going to depreciate. So you got to be smart enough to say, hey, if I buy a new car, I pull it off the lot, I'm going to lose this amount of money, and that's going to depreciate to this amount of money. Look at it and say, well, maybe I should get a car 2-3 years older. Or maybe this home looks great, for this amount of money, but I should probably get a home where maybe I get it and it's cheaper, and then I can, maybe the next one I'll get, but I can Airbnb this and maybe make some income off of it. Take your time when figuring things out, but first kind of figure out what you want. But just be smart. Don't sell yourself out. Don't be stupid. We all make mistakes, and really learn from those mistakes, because a lot of people, as you know, and you see them with your friends, maybe family members, colleagues, they keep doing the same thing over and over and over again, where you can see it even with relationships, with marriages. I just ran into a guy who was married 4 times. I finally had to say, dude, and he's divorced again, when will it end? And I'm not saying you can get married 50 times, I don't care, but he was stressed out. I'm like, well, I married one twice, but then this happened, and then I married that one, and then this, and now I'm with this other one. I'm like, what are you, again, and I'm not saying anything against marriage. You like marriage. If you get in a relationship, you understand you're kind of, you're not owned there, but now it is a situation where almost all your decisions, not all of them, most of them, you have to have the approval, or you have to agree upon a lot of things, which include massive amounts of decisions and high-end decisions. You buy a house, if you're married, you know what? They have as much say-so as you do, especially if they're both going to be obviously on the mortgage. It could be even buying a car. Are you going to plan on having children, or what are you doing? You always kind of have somebody else that you kind of have to explain yourself to, or maybe not everyone. I'm not saying every relationship's like that, but again, think about those things, the position you're putting yourself in. Do you feel like you are still in control of your own life? I just used a musician just as an example. Yeah, and just really start sitting back and looking at your life in general. I had to do that as well, because I was living way outside my means when I was younger. I was actually making a ton of money. It was the flip side. When I was younger, I was making so much money at a young age. And I don't say that to boast, but I had a lot of cars. I was able to fly all over, and no matter where I went, I got treated, honestly, like a celebrity. I don't know anybody who lived a better life. I don't care if I went to Atlantic City, Vegas, wherever I went. I can really do whatever I want, whenever I want, with my friends, and I always thought that money was going to come in, and then you start buying more and more things, and I kind of teach that in my Mastering Self-Confidence program too, regarding identity. And don't get so wrapped up with a certain type of identity, I believe, that's going to hurt you. And I see all these things where all you see is guys that are on the internet are telling you could be a millionaire or this and that, and they're all driving Bentleys, Ferraris, and I did this on another podcast. Maybe that's not your thing. And I realized after having a lot of things, my life getting much more simpler and not caring that I have to have all these new cars or always have to fly first class or always having to stay in the top hotels or having the best of everything, having a Rolex or having, all jewelry. The more I weeded my possessions out of my life, the better I was feeling. That doesn't mean I want to be broke. But what I'm saying is not only did I, a lot of those things I had to pay for, you make payments to, but then even after I was done paying them, it was almost like it was like a monkey on my back. Even when I had big homes and things and I had to move, it was like, oh my God, I got to pay movers $10,000, which if you can afford it, you're a multimillionaire or whatever. But a lot of times we just waste a lot of money. But not only that, mentally, we think we're not competent because we don't have all the things that we think we should deserve, or you think it's going to be a certain way when life usually isn't always like that. And back to being owned, credit card companies, go look at your credit card. I don't know what it is. Do they kind of own you every month? Like, are they, they're in your mind. You have to pay this. You're paying too much interest. It could be anything. Who are you, again, in control of a lot of the decisions you made, I guess you could say. Does that make sense? I don't even know if I said that correctly. Who cares? But, yeah, so I'm going to actually wrap it up there. I don't want to get long-winded on this. I probably already did. But please, try to look at your life like I say to a lot of people. Look at your behavior and make your life simpler. And again, I get that you may or may not want to. You probably do want to have a lot of things. A lot of people want a lot of stuff, and I get it. But there's a lot of things that come along with that, right? A lot of risk, especially if things don't go right. A lot of stress. And I promise you, I can speak just for myself, is more is not always better. And I find certain things, I believe, in your life, smaller things. And again, that doesn't mean you give up on your dreams. If you want to live in a mansion, you want to have a jet, if you want all those things, God bless you, go after them. But if you have to put yourself in a position where you have to embezzle money, lie, cheat, steal, do all those things, then it's on you, All right. Thanks for listening to the Rich CELENZA Show. WTF are you talking about? I got a YouTube channel. We're on LinkedIn and Twitter as well. So, yeah, please take care of yourself. All right, take care.